From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
Finding his footing. No longer a freshman legislator, Congressman David Cicilline returns to Washington after cruising to victory in a bruising campaign. Yet he once again finds himself in a sea of red, a member of the minority party in the GOP-controlled House of Representatives. Can second-term Cicilline see his priorities through, or is it another 2 years of partisan bickering and gridlock? Our guest this week on Newsmakers, U.S. Representative for Rhode Island's 1st Congressional District, David Cicilline.
Good morning. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the panel, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi and Eyewitness News analyst Arlene Violet. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning. Good morning, Congressman.
Morning.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with the debt ceiling. We are on the verge of the newest installment in a series of budget showdowns in Washington, and I'd like to remind everyone that in 2001, partisan bickering over whether to raise the borrowing cap resulted in a downgrading of the U.S. credit rating. 2011, thank you. Time is running out, and Congress has to tackle this once again. The House this week passed a bill that would allow the Treasury Department to continue paying bondholders no matter what happens in the debt ceiling debate. Speaker John Boehner said this was a way to send a signal to the markets that the U.S. is good on its debts to avoid another lowering of the country's credit rating. Why did you vote against this
I think
bill?
it has exactly the reverse impact. First of all, this legislation, which I was proud to vote against along with Congressman Langevin, would have required the United States to pay China first for its debts. That would be behind the men and women who are in uniform, active military. It would be behind businesses who are selling goods and services to the federal government. So the notion of paying China first before meeting our other obligations is absolutely wrong. In addition to that, I think it sends the wrong message, because what, frankly, the Republicans are suggesting in that legislation is that we are going to default. And so they're actually sending a message to the markets that we're planning to not raise the debt ceiling, default on our obligations, and by the way, here's how we're going to pay our debts. We absolutely cannot default on the responsibilities and obligations of the United States. We have to reach a compromise that will ensure we protect the credit rating of the United States. The good news is, as a result of some new revenues that have been generated, as a result in some slowing of the growth of healthcare costs, it looks like we're not going to reach that point until early fall in September. So we will have an opportunity, I hope, to come to a resolution that will ensure that we meet our obligations. Or just expand the bickering
that could happen
down there.
Let's hope not. Let's be real, though, that bill will likely fail in the Senate, and certainly the president would never sign it. But talk to the average Rhode Islander here, if you could. To them, it may be hard to justify to continue to borrow more and more money.
Absolutely. Look, I think there is no question that we have a responsibility to deal with this debt in a responsible way. We have been successful in reducing the deficit by $2.3 trillion. We did that by a combination of new revenues, about $600 billion through the fiscal cliff, and about $1.7 billion in cuts in spending. So we have made substantial progress in reaching what sort of everyone agrees is $4 trillion in deficit reduction. We have much more to do, but we absolutely have to do it in the way the president has said, in a balanced way, which cuts spending where we can cut it, but makes the investments in education, in infrastructure, in science and research, the things that are necessary to grow our economy. Because what we have to do is we have to grow the economy, get people back to work. That's one of the best strategies in terms of managing our debt, if we grow the economy and get more people working. So we've got to do it in a responsible way. What we cannot do, I think, is just simply cut and think we can cut our way out of this problem. We can't.
But you don't agree with the president's entire blueprint for that. You've gotten a lot of national attention lately because you're organizing a resolution to oppose change CPI, and before people fall asleep, that's basically, it is a cut, in, at least a trim, in Social Security benefits over the long term. This is coming from President Obama, a Democrat, someone you support. Why are you opposing him on that?
I think the president's budget in general is a very good document. It makes real investments in manufacturing and infrastructure and education and pre-K, some important investments in science and research. It's a budget which really focuses on what we can do to grow the economy and get people working. It includes change CPI, which I strongly oppose. The reality is current cost of living adjustments in Social Security are inadequate to provide seniors with what they need to live with dignity. Change CPI will make it worse. And the real problem with change CPI is it makes it worse. As the longer a senior lives, the worse it is for them. Where 1 in 3 seniors relies almost exclusively on Social Security to live. The average beneficiary for a Rhode Islander on Social Security is $14,500. These are not folks living high on the hog. And what we should be doing is making sure that we strengthen Social Security, protect beneficiaries, not only for the people receiving it today, but for all future generations. And to also remember, Social Security has not contributed one penny to the deficit. It has a balance of $2.7 trillion. It's not an entitlement like the Republicans call it. It is, in fact, an earned benefit.
I want to push back on you just a little because the Liberal Center on Budget and Policy Party is one of the most respected think tanks on the left. Their president has suggested if including a chain CPI proposal with protections for the very old and low income can enable a balanced plan to become law, we should be open to it. They say it's better than raising Medicare age or premium support. What do you say to that?
Look, there are absolutely alternatives, a big balanced plan that don't include chain CPI. There was a proposal that we put forth, authored by Chris Van Hollen from Maryland, that enacts the Buffett rule, ends subsidies to big oil companies, and some of the big agricultural subsidies, makes other adjustments. So I think we can do it in a balanced way, but we shouldn't do it on the backs of our seniors, veterans, and persons with disabilities. There are other ways to balance our budget and to reach a big deal without really going out after some of the people who are living on really fixed incomes, who are finding it difficult to make ends meet, to buy groceries, pay for their prescription drugs. And again, the average beneficiary is $14,500.
Well, you've cited, of course, 1 out of 3, which means 2 out of 3 seniors aren't, gripping onto it for dear life. What, if anything, would you ever entertain relative to changing anything about Social Security?
Well, I think there's one thing we should absolutely change with Social Security. Social Security used to be a tax which was assessed on approximately 90% of the income generated in this country, which was sort of where it has been historically. It currently collects taxes on about 83% of wages earned, because the cap, which is about $115,000, only captures 83% of earnings, because there's been such a growth in income at the very top. So there are some proposals to scrap the cap completely. If you do that,
is that you?
Well, no, that's one proposal which
What's yours?
I think that's a good one, and you will then extend the life of Social Security for 75 years and be able to have a real cost of living adjustment. There are some people who say, well, let's raise the cap gradually over time. That's another proposal. But we ought to be looking at ensuring that we're capturing sufficient resources to ensure that we can strengthen and protect Social Security. Cutting benefits is, I don't think, the answer.
Let's keep hammering away at policy, if we could, on health care. I want to play you something, if we could. Earlier this week on Ted's show, Executive Suite, he had on the co-owners of the restaurant Sienna on Federal Hill. Ted asked them about the upcoming changes as a result of the Health Care Reform Act, or Obamacare. Owner Chris Tarrow said it, quote, scares us a lot because they have over 50 employees, which means the law requires them to offer health care or pay a fine. Let's take a listen to him on this.
The restaurant industry, and I'm assuming a few others, that are lots of employees, low margins, the law didn't take into consideration what it would do to these, because clearly what they don't want us doing is inflating our prices to cover it, and 2, laying off people to cover it, 3, knocking people to part-time. But those are really my 3 options.
He went on to say that for 100 employees, it's going to cost him roughly $300,000 annually to meet the requirements of the Health Care Reform Act. What do you say to him?
Well, I mean, I think first of all, as we implement health care reform, we have to be sure that it works for Rhode Islanders and for people all across this country. And small business owners present some of the greatest challenges for exactly the reason Chris described. And it's a great restaurant and a great company. And I think, what the health care bill provides is, first of all, a tax credit for businesses, $5,000 per employee. So there's some incentive there to mitigate some of the cost to an employer. The creation of this exchanges, the health exchanges, which are designed to drive down the price of health care and make it more affordable. And then the presence of subsidies, so that people will have some ability to make up what it is that they may not be able to purchase. But I think, what we have to do as this is being implemented, we have to be sure that it works the way it was intended to work. But there are already thousands of Rhode Islanders who are benefiting from this. There are Rhode Islanders who are now staying on their parents' plan. I think about 9,000 young people who are under 26 who previously would not have had health insurance. There are people who have pre-existing medical conditions that are now guaranteed coverage that before could be denied coverage. There are seniors, I think almost 175,000 seniors, who have benefited from the closing of the donut hole and a reduction of the cost of their prescription drugs. So there's lots of good things in the health care bill.
We know those benefits very well from the campaign. The problem is that's not going to help out Chris Tarrow at all.
No, I think that's right. And I think what we have to figure out is the tax credit sufficient to make it work for small businesses? Is it the right number? Is that coupled with what the exchanges will provide in terms of reduced cost work? But this year of transition, or the year of implementation, I think is going to be a time to listen very carefully to see how it's actually working, but to understand that we want to live in a country where people have access to quality, affordable health care, that businesses benefit from employees who are healthy and well, that the way we drive down healthcare costs is to invest in prevention and wellness, which is built into healthcare reform.
Could you foresee tweaking the law?
Absolutely. And I think everyone understands that we need to look at this, see how it's implemented, and be prepared to improve it when we can.
You've joined No Labels, which is the group pushing to reduce partisanship in Congress and get more bipartisanship. At the same time, I follow your work. You're a pretty reliable vote for Democratic leadership and Nancy Pelosi. How do you square those two things? Being part of No Labels, which is, sometimes people on the left are pretty critical of that kind of idea that we all just kumbaya and come together. No, there's real differences, and there's a reason we vote against each other.
And I think that's the advantage of No Labels. I'm actually a founding member of No Labels. We now have almost 70 members, pretty evenly split between Democrats and Republicans, one independent, Angus King from Maine. But No Labels, unlike a lot of organizations which tries to drive people to a central position, actually invites people to come passionately, believing in what they believe in and articulating it, but with a willingness to listen to each other, a willingness to listen to other ideas and to consider other viewpoints, not to sort of abandon what you believe in, but to say, look, we might have different opinions, we might feel very passionately about it, but we should be able to sit in a room and figure out, is there some way we can work together and solve this problem our country faces? We've chosen to focus on a series of issues which I think everyone agrees on. How do we eliminate waste and fraud in government, and some really,
Tim always laughs when you bring that one up.
But the point is there's some really good opportunities, particularly with government contracting, and so I think there's some good opportunities. But look, what I think people want is they want, no matter how passionately you feel about an issue, they want people to figure out some way to work together to get results that can address some of the big issues we face in this country. And there's not a lot of venues where Democrats and Republicans are having those conversations. We meet every week. It's a very serious effort. I'm trying to get a couple of my no-label Republican colleagues to sponsor my Make It in America bill. So I think, it's a real opportunity for us to try to just get to know each other, but also to realize that, we can agree on some things, even if we feel very passionately in opposite views on different things.
Well, what does No Labels actually accomplish then, other than talking?
Well,
isn't that the same problem all the time?
No, I think you're right.
Name one thing.
No, I raised that during a lot of our meetings because, talking and relationship building is a very important part of the first step, because if you don't talk to folks, you can't work with them. And so I don't minimize the fact that it's forcing us to be in a room together and get to know each other and have conversations about important issues. We're in the process right now of putting together our agenda of what we're going to work on legislatively. But it's not just about legislation, it's also about creating a culture in Congress where we have the ability to listen to each other in a respectful way and try to find common ground and get work done for the American people.
All right, we're going to take a break on Newsmakers. When we come back, we're going to dive into immigration. Our guest is Congressman David Cicilline. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my right, Ted Nesi and Arlene Violet. Our guest this week is U.S. Congressman David Cicilline. Arlene.
Congressman, as you know, there are credible reports that the FBI did not share the information from the Russians relative to the two brothers in the Boston Marathon situation. New York Times also out with the story this week that the same thing happened with the New York Times Square bombing, not sharing information with the New York police officers. Is it time for the FBI director to head for the hills because he's been there too long?
I don't think so. I think that's premature. I do think that there has to be a very thorough review of all the circumstances surrounding the information we received from Russian authorities and how that information was shared or not shared. For example, I don't know whether there are thousands of such communications given in the course of a week, and so you can't sort of start tailing every one of it. If it's the first and only time it's happened in that month, then it raises a different expectation. But I think this is an issue we have to look at very carefully and determine, are there procedures that need to be changed? Are there procedures that need to be put into place that don't exist? To be sure that when we receive information like this, that it's dealt with properly.
Does your committee have some jurisdiction over that because of the foreign policy issues that you deal with? People are afraid it's going to fall through the cracks because no one's quite sure who totally has the
Foreign
oversight.
Affairs Committee.
Yeah, we do receive classified briefings on a number of these issues, particularly around the circumstances of the event and then the subsequent investigation.
And this one?
We did.
I want to move on to a local issue. Congressman, Providence must repay the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, more than $600,000 for, as they say, improperly spending taxpayer money through the troubled loan program known as PEDP. During the campaign, you brushed off the PEDP stories as opposition research. But now HUD is coming after the city for $600,000. So is HUD wrong?
No, look, I think anyone would acknowledge that when you have the opportunity to have the federal government absorb expenses of a city government, you try to be very aggressive in doing that. There were expenses that were disallowed that the director thought were appropriate. I think most of them were marketing and economic development expenses.
And limousine rides.
And we had, during those 8 years, $8 billion of new investment in the city. And so I think the director, I don't know the particulars of every thing he submitted, but I think it's not uncommon to aggressively say, no, this is an expense that is covered by HUD, and then you go through a process in which HUD says yes or no. And so I think it is not surprising that there are expenses that HUD have made a determination that those are not in fact covered. But I think most cities will submit things in the hope that they're actually covered activity with a good faith argument that they are. I assume that's what happened in this case with the director, and then they made a determination that they're not. If you remember when this story first broke, they claimed that there were about double that amount. And so after review, they determined half of those were in fact coverable in reimbursable expenses, half weren't. And again, if they're not reimbursable under the rules, of course they should be reimbursed. But I think being aggressive in trying to get the federal government to cover expenses that are otherwise covered by the taxpayers is a strategy that lots of cities would follow.
Does this legitimize the, some
no,
of the claims
I think,
that were made?
I think all of those were done in good faith. I have no reason to believe the director didn't believe that those were expenses that were actually covered by HUD regulations, and there was a dispute as to whether or not they were, and they made a determination that they weren't. But I don't.
I want to ask you about politics. Lincoln Chafee, he's an independent, but he endorsed you last year. He co-chaired President Obama's re-election campaign, and of course he praised you at the same-sex marriage bill signing last week for leading on that effort for many years. Would you consider endorsing Governor Chafee next year?
Look, I'm a Democrat. I've been a Democrat my whole life, and I expect that I will support the Democratic nominee for governor as I will for the other offices. And Governor Chafee's been a great friend to me and a great supporter, and that election obviously is a long way away, but it would be my expectation that I'd be supporting whoever the Democratic nominee is.
Have you talked to him about becoming a Democrat? That is swirling around.
I have not.
Has Angel Taveras or Gina Raimondo talked about their plans? You're a powerful force on the east side.
I see both the mayor and the treasurer pretty regularly, and I think it's no secret that they're both looking at running for governor. They're both terrifically qualified, good candidates, and I'm sure when the time comes, we'll have a chance to talk about that.
As you know, some Secret Service members were suspended because of the caper in South America with prostitutes. This week, one of those gentlemen talked about the fact that they're being railroaded because a lot of people that have top clearances do exactly the same thing, and that ought to be looked into. Do you think there should be an investigation to see what, if any, so-called top clearance people are hiring prostitutes?
Well,
and do you regard that as a foreign policy or a national security issue?
Of course. I mean, these are individuals that are charged with the security of the President of the United States, who have top-level security clearance, and we have a right to expect them to engage in behavior beyond reproach. And if there are any serious allegations of that, they ought to be investigated and people ought to be prosecuted.
But again, on your committee, it would appear that this does impinge potentially on foreign policy, blackmail, et cetera. Is there any movement in your committee to look at this issue?
Again, I think the jurisdiction for Secret Service is not in the Foreign Affairs Committee.
He mentioned
but there'll be some,
other top
but there may be some implication
people
in terms of our relationship in other countries. I don't know that there's a hearing currently scheduled in the Foreign Affairs Committee, but I could imagine that this is an issue which the committee would take up.
As I hinted at, let's talk about immigration. The Senate immigration bill has a path to citizenship that takes up to 10 years for those in the country already. It requires stronger offense at the border and more border control, and has other items like more H-1B visas for high-skilled workers. What do you like about that bill? What don't you like?
I think the bill that we're seeing in the Senate is different than the bill that will come out of the House. The House has had a group working in secret for about 5 years, I think, or 6 years. Republicans and Democrats have been working on this, and only in the last months, I think, acknowledged that they existed, and they've been doing a lot of good work. But I think the issues that we're going to struggle with are the following. I mean, I think there has to be a path to citizenship for the 11 million aspiring citizens who are in our country now. I think what we have to be sure is that the path is not so burdensome as to be.
Do you think the Senate one is?
Well, again, I think everyone recognizes that we have to be sure people have, behaved and don't have any criminal record, that they paid their taxes, that they pay any other penalties that are appropriate, that they go to the end of the line. But there has to be a reasonable period of time so that it's not, so that people sort of never see that possibility happening. I think the second thing that we have to pay close attention to is this triggering mechanism, this notion of we're going to implement this path to citizenship and this ability to unite families after a whole set of conditions that are met and make sure those conditions are not impossible to meet. And so this idea of making sure that we have a border security plan, I think makes sense, but it certainly can't be the case that we can't have immigration reform until we guarantee that not a single person enters the country illegally. I mean, that's almost impossible to achieve. So I think the triggering mechanism is going to matter. The length of time, this sort of path to citizenship is going to matter. But look, I think the business community has said very clearly, it matters a lot that we remain a place that attracts the best and brightest minds. We want to be a country that, my great-grandparents came here from Italy because they wanted to build a better life for their family. That's why immigrants come to America, and we want to be a country that is inviting, and at the same time we want to be sure that we're protecting a national security interests and American citizens from danger, and so we want to balance both of those responsibilities.
On a somewhat related note, we got the new census numbers this week about who voted in last year's election, and I wrote, yes, I did, thank you. And hopefully people will look at it in PRI.com, and I was pretty stunned to see Hispanic and black turnout, this is in Rhode Island, not nationally, in Rhode Island was up 15,000 more voters than 2008, which was a huge year. The white vote was down by 51,000 voters all in Rhode Island. Put in perspective, the white share of the vote here was 97% of all the voters in 96. Now it's down to 85%. I mean, first, does this surprise you, or does this fit with what you saw? I mean, pundits, including myself, did not expect you to win as big as you did in November.
It doesn't surprise me. I mean, if you look at the changing demographics of our state and of our country, the growing participation of the Latino and African American community is not surprising. I think one of the reasons that the Republicans in the House have started to focus on immigration reform is they really realize, as a matter of political necessity, that we have got to fix our broken immigration system. And if they're seen as a group that's stopping that, that they will pay the political price for it in the next election. So I think it's a reality of sort of the changing demographics of our country. How
much does it change sort of for politicians, for people like yourself and around going forward, when you see those kind of numbers and you watch the demography? I mean, how do you reflect that, I guess, over the changing constituency you have?
I mean, I think it's just being aware of the community that you represent, whether you're running for a local office, a state office, or federal office, understanding who it is that is in that state, who it is in that congressional district or that city or town, and understanding that the presence of a Latino community, African American community, that people in those communities expect people who are running for office to talk to them about issues that are important to them, to listen to their concerns, and then support public policy they care about, in the same way we have done with lots of other communities for a very long time in this country.
There seems to be some substantive deviation in the explanation of what happened in Benghazi from the Obama administration's formal statements about it versus the deputy chief testifying this past week, saying he got demoted because he pointed out the inconsistencies in the explanation. Are you convinced that the Obama administration has been forthcoming on what happened there, or do you think a much deeper investigation has to commence?
I had the opportunity actually to sit through a multitude of briefings on this issue, to actually participate in hearings before the Foreign Affairs Committee. I was incredibly impressed by the work that was done by the Secretary right after that incident in ordering the Accountability Review Board by Ambassador Pickering to really go through and make a whole set of recommendations which she both embraced completely and began to implement. And I think, there's a lot of conversation about the way the incident was described, which seems to be a fascination for some folks in this. But I think there's no question that there were a set of reforms that were recommended by the Accountability Review Board that are currently being implemented. We should be sure that they're implemented. This was a horrific tragedy where we lost great American heroes. We have a responsibility to make sure that they are secure in diplomatic posts around the world. But I think a lot of what we saw just the last couple of days is attempting to politicize this horrific tragedy. And if you have any doubt about it, go on the website today, although I don't encourage you to watch it. Karl Rove's group Crossroads already has a commercial out on the web attacking Hillary for this. So I think this is a lot about trying to undermine the extraordinary work of a great Secretary
You're
of
on the
State.
Foreign Affairs Committee. Are you implementing and overseeing the implementation
Yes,
of
in
those
fact,
reforms?
Very
interesting.
briefly.
Yeah, we've had a hearing on it, and in fact, that's what the focus should remain on. We should continue to have hearings to make sure that those recommendations are being implemented. I predict you'll see more hearings like we saw in the Senate, where there'll be a lot of discussion about how the event was described, and a lot less focus by the Republicans in the House on what we should be focusing on, and that's the implementation of the recommendations.
My apologies, but in 30 seconds, beginning August 1st, same-sex marriage will be legal in the state, something you have supported strongly. What was May 2nd like for you?
You know, it was great. It was great for our state. It was great to see people who have worked on this for for a very long time, and to think of people like Julie Pell, who wasn't there but spent her life working on this. To see Rhoda Perry, my former state senator, and to know the work that Speaker Fox put into this, and the governor with his early support. And it was a great day for Rhode Island. We joined the rest of New England and ensured that everyone in our state has access to full marriage equality.
Congressman David Cicilline, thank you very much for joining us this week. I want to thank you for watching. If you missed any of the program, it's online, WPRI.com. For Arlene Violet, Ted Nisi, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.